planning, why we need a consistency, why we need definition is because, as we have a one product portfolio, really it's multi-product, but they are dependent on each other. So going back to the PayPal example, where you can say, okay, I have a consumer who's a user who uses PayPal to buy things online. And then this consumer product manager or product lead has to depend on the payments team, because if you consumer uses the product, the payment needs to support it and also tied to the risk. And then also payment has to go through to the merchant. So the reconciliation and then the experience are also tied together when two parties, the user and the merchant, interact through the same platform. So the portfolio dependency is one thing really forces us not looking at this as 4 different teams, and really just 4 different teams need to work together and make the product work. So what does it mean when you have that kind of dependency? Is that you have many goals. Each of the team may have a different North Star. They may have a different goals. They may have a different strategy. And sometimes they can conflicting with each other, right? So using example again to consumer, if you as a user, as a head of the product running the consumer, you want to make sure you can have a user buying experience as frictionless as possible. I don't want you to enter a lot of stuff, do a lot of fraud analysis and so on. But then that also likely could lead to higher fraud. So if you want to reduce fraud, you want more checks and balances. So now you can see the frictionless buying experience of our consumer. It doesn't necessarily work the best for some of the highest control, reduce fraud loss goals that the risk team may have. And the other example, some of you who've been around for using PayPal for long enough time to know that before PayPal kind of forced you to always use balance or bank to pay, you have to, every time you have to go change it to credit card because you want to pay with the credit card. The reason behind it was because the credit cards are higher cost. So the payments team, their goal is to make sure to minimize the cost, right? So that there is a conflicting goal as well. So as an entire PayPal product, then how do you manage both the technical and the product dependencies from the consumer with the payments and risk teams, as well as manage the conflicting goals each of these product teams work together? And that's really where not only portfolio management come into play. To run effective portfolio management, the first thing to do is actually taking on a outcome-focused adjustment to decide where we are going to focus more and how we're going to adjust. If a fraud is rampant, we're going to dial the fraud engine so that we can having higher control and potentially at the cost, some of the cost at the consumer experience. But then consumer teams should also think about other things they could do to offset some of the fraud adjustment. So as a portfolio as a company, they're thinking about how do you manage different elements and needs that you have to look at different outcome, different focus, and adjust it across from time to time, and not have a static saying, here's my prioritization, here's my prioritization method, and that will be end of it. That's not responsive. So, so now we know in the fast-moving industry, when you have a digital product, you have multiple moving pieces. They could have dependencies, and often they have competing goals. So how do you manage it? You want to adopt a responsive way to do portfolio management, product portfolio management, and that means you start with aligning your product goals, not individually across the board. Then you need to negotiate and plan among your dependencies. It will be there. And regardless of how you slice and dice your organization, regardless of how you create your org structure or product teams, it will be there. It takes more than one team to build a product. And then based on the outcome, based on the result we're achieving, and then you decide whether we should change something or not. So that really leads to something we call strategic planning. But strategic planning in a way, in the modern way, is a little bit different. So